All right, sound the alarm. We say it every single day. Lions add another depth piece.
You are Locked On Lions, your daily Detroit Lions podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, welcome in, everybody. It is a Wednesday edition of Locked On Lions, Locked On Podcast Network, the number one sports podcast network. Matt Dery with you. Coming up on the program today, Jeff Iafrate is going to join us from the Lions Collective podcast. He, along with Justin Rogers, Colton Pouncey, and Will Birchfield, all interviewed Brad Holmes yesterday. The Lions general manager will get Jeff's thoughts on sitting down next to Brad Holmes coming up momentarily. We'll talk about the financial constraints topic that Brad kept bringing up. We'll bring up just kind of all the things that Brad had to say yesterday with Jeff. That is coming up momentarily here on the program. But first, news of the day. The Lions have announced the signing on another one-year deal of offensive lineman Ben Bartch to a contract. Terms undisclosed right now, but it's got to be, as Brad pointed out yesterday, pretty much a cheap deal. And it's another one-year deal for a guy mid to late 20s. He's 27 years of age that is going to get an opportunity here on a prove-it deal. Ben Bartch has spent most of his career in Jacksonville and with the 49ers. He was a former fourth-round pick of the Jags in 2020. He played 4 seasons there and then was moved on to San Francisco in 2023. 6'6", 315 pounds. Again, fourth-round pick of the Jags in the last 2 years, 2.5 years, has been with the 49ers. And I know many of you are going to be very, very stunned when I'm about to bring up, but Ben Bartch is injury prone. Ben Bartch cannot stay healthy. He started 2 games for the 49ers last year, opened the season as the week 1 and week 2 starter at left guard. Had a pretty decent game in the opener at Seattle with a PFF grade of 74.8. Week 2 at New Orleans, PFF grade of 73.5. He's a better run blocker than pass blocker. But again, biggest issue with Ben Bartch is injuries. He has started 24 games in 7 years, 11 at right guard, and most recently 13 games at left guard. Over the last 3 years, though, he's only started 4 games because of a lot of injuries. He has been, he suffered a dislocated knee a couple of years ago, benched and waived a few years back in Jacksonville, picked up by the 49ers. But again, injuries have just been a problem. And in speaking to one of my 49er insiders, the great John Long of the Southeast Michigan Chamber of Commerce, John watches every game. He brings it up all the time. Ben Bartch is not a bad football player, but he just cannot stay healthy. Again, this past year played in 6 games, but was out between weeks 3 and week 9. And had opportunities in both Jacksonville and San Francisco and just could not take advantage of them when it comes to health and performance. But again, when he played the first 2 weeks last year as a starting left guard for the Niners, he was not bad at all. So now you look at all of the moving pieces and parts that go with the interior offensive line of the Lions. And Bartch visited Detroit, I believe, a couple of weeks ago and now agrees to terms today. But right now, if the season started today, which I always love that term, you'd have an offensive line of, I would guess, Penei Sewell at left tackle, Christian Mahogany at left guard, Cade Mays at center, Tate Ratledge at right guard, and Larry Borum at right tackle. Again, the Lions have the draft. They could take a tackle at 17. They could take whatever they want to do. They could take multiple offensive linemen. All right. Last year, the Lions drafted multiple offensive linemen. They took Tate Ratledge in the 2nd round. They took Miles Frazier in the 5th round. What Bartch provides is depth at a position of need. No one's saying he's going to come in and unseat the starters, Mahogany and Ratledge, at guard. But now you look at it and you go, all right, if Mahogany gets hurt again, if Mahogany is mediocre, Miles Frazier could step in. He played last year as a rookie and was not terrible. You got Bartch also. You've got Juice Scruggs that could play guard and center. Mason Miller is a guy that the Lions picked up, of course, from Ohio State, who was injured all of last year. Colby Sorsdahl has played in the past. Giovanni Manu's more of a tackle. But they needed to add depth on this offensive line. They've had Awashika for years. They've had Skipper for years. And they're going a little bit younger. And they're going to give Bartch an opportunity if he stays healthy. He has been somebody that has started games in the NFL. If I look here, last year, his overall PFF grade, 71.7. In 2024, it was 74.8. His 4 years with the Jags, it was kind of a struggle bus. 58.5 his first year, 62.1 second year, 60.5 his third year, 61.2 his fourth year. And then the Jacksonville Jaguars cut him. The Niners picked him up in 2023. And again, he has started a handful of games the last 2 years for them. Biggest reason he didn't play more last year was the injuries that he suffered at the start of the season. So Ben Bartch, your newest Detroit Lion, that is now 15 signees. And 14 of the 15 are one-year deals? So Brad Holmes said it yesterday, and we'll talk about it with Jeff Iafrate, one of the co-hosts of the Lions Collective podcast. Brad has said it. This team has some financial constraints. They want to re-sign Jack Campbell, Jameer Gibbs, Brian Branch, Sam LaPorta, and keep those guys around. And in order to do so, on top of all the other re-signings that they've made over the years, it's going to take a lot of cash. And so there's not a lot of money with the constraints to be paying bigger free agents right now. So Ben Bartch is a guy, again, on a one-year deal. If he's healthy, might be a nice depth piece. I just want the guys in front of him, the starters on the offensive line, to perform better. I want to see Christian Mahogany take that next step, stay healthy and play well, so we don't have to talk about Ben Bartch or Miles Frazier behind him. Or if Frazier steps up and becomes a starter, put him there and keep him there. That's what we hope for. And then if there's an injury, you don't want to lose too much ground. We saw last year with the Lions, when there were injuries, boy, oh boy. The offensive line just to start wasn't very good, but the depth spots made it a disaster at times for this team. All right, Jeff Iafrate going to join us next. One of the hosts of the Lions Collective podcast. I don't know Jeff that well. It's the first time I'm actually meeting him, and we're going to welcome him to the podcast coming up next, right here on a Wednesday edition of a Locked On Lions on the Locked On Podcast Network. And Locked On Lions for today, brought to you by our friends at Robinhood. What if sports were traded like markets? Now you can put your sports IQ to work in real time with Robinhood prediction markets. It's not you against the house. It's you participating in a live market. You can buy or sell your positions live all game long. Use your sports knowledge in the moments that matter. Robinhood prediction markets changes the game. It's people moving the action. So when momentum shifts, you can move with it. I always knew the game, but never had a dynamic way to apply that knowledge. Now you can actually take part live in a market powered by people. You're no longer just a spectator. Play by play, you decide. Trade every play with Robinhood. Now available across the U.S. Download the Robinhood app now to begin. Futures and cleared swaps trading involves significant risk. It is not appropriate for everyone. Event contracts are offered by Robinhood Derivatives, LLC, a registered futures commission merchant and swap firm. All right, as promised, here he is, a new face here on Locked On Lions. Jeff Iafrate is with us, Crunch Time Sports, but also a part of the Lions Collective group that interviewed Brad Holmes yesterday, and he joins us today on the program. Jeff, good to meet you.
It's good to finally meet you. I'm honored to be here. It's been a crazy 24 hours. I mean, I knew about this Brad Holmes stuff for about 2 weeks, but I knew the people would appreciate it. I know people like yourself would appreciate it. I'm so fired up to be talking about it finally. It was a great interview.
Now, you were very self-deprecating on the interview. You were like, Brad, these guys are pros in here. I'm just the radio guy. You didn't have to do that. I mean, you're part of the team. I thought everybody did a good job.
Yeah, that's probably something, Matt, I'm improving at. I always say it's like a thing I always say, like I just yell into a microphone, not literally, but that's my job. I'm a content guy. I'm an entertainer. those guys are, what I mean by professionals is, those guys are in the room, they have built-in relationships, a lot of those guys. But I had someone else call me too. They're like, what are you talking about? What are you talking about saying these guys are professionals and you're not? You got to be, you got to be nicer to yourself. And they're probably right. But I always try and pump those guys up. They're all great dudes, all of them. So shout out to those guys.
Yeah, no, big fan. Obviously, we've had Justin on I've known Justin forever. Justin covered the Pistons when I did Pistons radio stuff. So, and Colton's great. And I know Will is very well liked. And so I thought you guys did well. Tell me about how it came about. I know Justin kind of, he's the one maybe closest to the situation, but how did Brad agree to this kind of situation? And I know you guys had to do it in person too, which probably made it better, right?
No doubt. There was a chance that it was potentially going to be virtual as well. So we were kind of weighing those options. I give all credit to Eamon with the Detroit Lions PR, Justin, of course, for that relationship. I mean, Justin's been at the forefront, really hammering it. And then Eamon, of course, for making it all kind of work. And we were trying to come up with some days because Brad's a busy guy, obviously. I mean, there was a feeling that it was going to be Friday, maybe virtually, but I'm glad we got it in person because it felt the chemistry was just much better. I think Brad Holmes, in my opinion, this is just my opinion. I think from the Lions PR and kind of the feeling I got was, I think, the Lions and Brad Holmes they know, like this past season, you missed the playoffs. The pressure's kind of on, I think the fan base is, more upset. There's a lot of people that are maybe questioning Brad Holmes or just questioning the Lions in general. And I think this is a good way.
You think?
Yeah, to put it lightly, but I think this is a good strategy and a good way for Brad to be more accessible because we've seen Brad do interviews, but most of the time it's national, it's Field Yates, it's bigger platforms. But to just hop on an hour podcast with, some beat writers and myself, it's like, he became more accessible, which I think was a good move on his part.
You got to sit next to him. Right? And you shook his hand at the end. That was exciting.
Oh yeah. I made sure to get the handshake in there too.
Oh my gosh. What did you think? And again, you don't have to share all the intimate details here, but were there discussions before and after? Was he amicable? And, how did the whole setup go?
Yeah, it was great. I always have the equipment because, Crunch Time Sports, we do shows all across the state of Michigan. So the equipment was easy. Eamon made it really easy with the setup. So we got to go into the press conference room and set up over there. And I'll say this, like Brad had meetings, throughout the morning and he came right over to the press room right after. And he was just, look, I'm a simple man. You do good things, I say good things. You do bad things, I say bad things. So I've never been disrespectful, but I've been critical, of course. Sure. But meeting the guy, you could tell he's a great guy. He's very, he's gracious with his time. It didn't seem like he was in a rush. He understood it. He answered every single question. I know people like to say, and he has a background in PR, so maybe some of the answers he's good at kind of dodging some of those questions, but that's his job. He's not going to reveal his strategy or get into certain details, but he was great. He talked to us after for another couple minutes and he even, picked my brain. Cause I tried to tell him like, hey, I'm the voice more so from the fans. I have a different perspective. These guys cover the team. I have a lot more communication with the fan base, just like what you do. It's the same thing with you, Matt. So he even asked, he's like, after the interview, he's like, the edge position, I'm paraphrasing, but he's like, the fans, he looked right at me, he goes, the fans aren't really happy with that edge position. I said, I think the problem is, Brad, in my opinion, is it's not necessarily as much the edge position. Of course it is, but it's more so the guys you sign that have inavailability concerns. I said, It's like the Davenport or, a Peyton Turner you bring in who's missed more games than played. And, he looked right at me. He's like, that's fair. He's like, that's fair. I understand that. So I wanted to follow up and be like, well, why? Why is that? But for him even to ask that and just kind of, he didn't have to stay after. He could have just walked out. So it was nice to be able to talk to him, and he was gracious with his time. So it was awesome.
I love that. Jeff Iafrate with us, Crunch Time Sports, also one of the fearsome foursome of the host of the Lions Collective podcast. And again, go on YouTube and watch, if you missed it yesterday, Brad Holmes sitting down with these four gentlemen to talk shop. All right. What was your biggest takeaway when I'm sure you're getting texts from friends. What did he say? What was the first text? What were you telling everybody he said? What came to mind first for you?
That's a great question. Well, after the interview, after, it finished, I rode home with Justin and we were just talking about some of the things that we were able to kind of pick his brain on. And I think the biggest thing for me, at least from like a personal point of view, because he addressed free agency, which I know people wanted to hear his thoughts on because, they were signing a lot of 1-year deals. And I think the clarity I got going into it, you see Larry Borum signed for a 1-year deal, and you see DJ Wanham signed for a 1-year deal. Isaiah Pacheco signed for a 1-year deal. And I think people look at some of those signings and go, okay, you're taking flyers on some of these guys. Larry Borum's probably a Dan Skipper replacement. That's many people's assumption when he first gets signed. But then as you kind of go in and you see free agency fold, and kind of unfold, you talk to Brad, and he thinks these guys aren't just 1-year flyer signings. Like he thinks Larry Borum is a capable, if necessary, starter at right tackle. He thinks DJ Wanham is a capable starter at edge. Isaiah Pacheco, he doesn't have any concerns that, the injuries are going to hinder him. So I think for me, the biggest takeaway was his evaluation on some of the players. Like Larry Borum, I don't look at anymore as a Dan Skipper replacement. I look at Larry Borum as safety if you don't get a tackle in the draft. Like he's going to be your starting right tackle. So I think for me, and I think for a lot of fans, you kind of got clarity that, he's not just signing, people call it depth pieces, and it might be interpreted as so, but these are guys that they look at as capable starters, and he reassured everybody in the interview.
Yeah, my lead today before you came on was Ben Bartch signing, and that's a depth piece. It just is. Right. Now, he has started games, but I think the big concern, and this, Jeff, in watching this team over the years is the offensive and defensive lines just haven't been good enough lately. And when this team was in the NFC Championship game years ago, that was where they were pretty damn good. And like you mentioned, Davenport, and look, if Borum can be fine at right tackle, that's great. You're moving Sewell to the left side, but still a lot of question marks. It seemed like you mentioned before about Brad. You're right. His eyes lit up talking about Borum and Scruggs. He seemed to really like too, right?
Absolutely. And that's another, I'm glad you mentioned him, Juice Scruggs. Like he views Juice Scruggs as maybe someone that could compete at that left guard. I think that left guard battle's one of the more interesting battles, I think, going into training camp and just the rest of the offseason, because you have Ben Bartch now, who's going to challenge. You have Juice Scruggs, who has experience at left guard, more so I think a backup center, but definitely has experience at left guard. And then you have guys like Miles Frazier, Mahogany, who started last year. And I know he last year wasn't, tied to Mahogany starting necessarily, but he ended up starting, and I know he got injured. So that left guard spot, I mean, we talked about the tackle spot, which is important, but that left guard spot is going to be a lot of competition. So Juice Scruggs, we praised him for the return on David Montgomery. I thought he did a really good job. I know David, we didn't want to leave, but the reality was he wanted to leave based on kind of the comments. They wanted him to stay. And I think Brad did a really good job on the return there. So to get a 4th round pick and a potential guy that could start for you either at center or left guard, I think is a pretty serviceable return considering the running back mark or just value in general in the NFL right now. So yeah, he likes Juice Scruggs, certainly.
Jeff, did you get the same sense that I did in watching Brad yesterday with you guys, that he had a lot more love for David Montgomery than he did Taylor Decker?
Yes. I that's the takeaway I had as well. The Taylor Decker thing's interesting because, he announces he's not retiring. He's coming back to play. And then soon after, they ask him to take less money, and he asked for his release. Now, I think, and this is just theorizing, I think there's a factor here that Taylor Decker maybe overrated his value when it comes to free agency, because he's still not signed. That doesn't mean he hasn't been offered or but I think the money that he expected to get in free agency just wasn't necessarily there. And he was asked Brad Holmes about maybe a potential reunion. And he said, I wouldn't rule anything out, especially probably in his experience. It's not a smart move to say, no, I do not expect a reunion. But yeah, I would say that's a safe bet there. David was someone who was, Taylor Decker's been a great player for a while. He's battled a lot of injuries. And I think with this theme of the offseason, they're just getting younger in a lot of areas. And I think Taylor, as good as he is when healthy, it's just hard to rely on him consistently. And they got younger technically at the tackle position, although when healthy, you'd say, downgrade to Taylor Decker. But yes, I think what you're saying is a fair statement there with Taylor Decker and Dave Montgomery.
More coming up with Jeff Iafrate. I want to ask him about the infamous financial constraints line and the fact that the guys didn't talk for a while because Brad went very long in trying to explain the financial constraints situation, which I found to be fascinating. We'll do that with Jeff Iafrate coming up next. But first, Locked On Lions for today, brought to you by our friends at Home Chef. This time of year where all you really want is something warm, easy, and satisfying. That's where Home Chef, they become such a go-to for me. It takes the stress out of dinner and makes it simple to enjoy cooking again. Home Chef makes cooking easy with fresh, pre-portioned ingredients, simple recipes, and meals that taste great. Meals are quick, from 30-minute recipes to oven-ready options when you don't want to think. Tons of variety as well, over 30 meals each week, so it never feels repetitive. The quality is legit. Even our friend Giada and Gordon Ramsay use it. Everything's portioned out, so there's less prep and cleanup. It just makes dinner feel manageable, even on the busiest days. For a limited time, Home Chef is offering our listeners 50% off and free shipping for your first box, plus free dessert for life. Go to homechef.com/LockedOnNFL. That's homechef.com/LockedOnNFL for 50% off your first box and free dessert for life. Must be an active subscriber to receive free dessert. Great to welcome in Jeff Iafrate to the podcast. Crunch Time Sports, also Lions Collective, was a part of the group that interviewed Brad Holmes yesterday. Check out that podcast. Just type in Lions Collective, Brad Holmes on YouTube, and it is there. It sounded like, Jeff, you were the one in charge of making sure it made it to the internet, huh?
Yeah, that's where I like to I take pride in that side of it, because I have a background in that stuff as well. So, whatever I could do for the team. Listen, it was a group effort. Lions Collective. If you're not subscribed, please go subscribe. Watch the interview process and watch the entire interview. It's amazing, man. So go check that out. But anything for the team. I'm a team first guy.
Always. Well, yeah, I was telling you before we came on the air. I called Justin yesterday. I'm like, when is it? Where is it? And you were the one kind of in charge. For some of us that have routines, I'm like, and it was up there pretty quickly. So
yeah, I felt like I had the big red button over here.
Yes.
It's just on my desk, big red button to release this interview. It was a lot of power at the time. I'm not going to lie.
No question. All right. So Brad Holmes yesterday, man, you guys, and look, everybody got in on the act of asking about, because he kept saying financial constraints, and then kind of stopped himself during one of the answers to say, you know what, let me explain this financial constraints, because I could tell he knew he was saying it a lot, and y'all stopped talking and let him go. Did that surprise you at all that he went that in depth talking about money?
I think he's smart, and I think he knows that this free agency, and I'll talk about kind of my angle on it, but he knows that probably the biggest gripe with fans is their lack of spending compared to, maybe what people expected, going into the offseason. They see a lot of guys, fans do, they see a lot of players depart, and people are waiting for replacements, serviceable replacements to maybe a starting linebacker in Anzalone, starting nickel and Amik Robertson, and so on and so forth. They lost AQM, who had 11 sacks last year, and they still haven't re-signed DJ Reader, but people are seeing these guys leave. They're seeing the questions with Kirby Joseph, and they're saying, okay, Brad, like, what's kind of the game plan going into free agency? And I think Brad, he definitely sees, he doesn't see everything, but I think he knows the sense of what the fans are talking about. So I think that's why he spent extra time kind of talking about it. I think the example he brought up was interesting when he said the $20 million thing, because it's almost like they have $20 million, but he was right. Like, the $20 million, we could go get a $20 million player, or we can fill out depth and get multiple players of lesser value with that $20 million. And, I everything he said is fair. Like, I think the one thing I didn't take away, but just reassured me after listening to him speak, is he's consistent. He's been this way since he got here. He's built through the draft. He signed his own players. He's developed his own players. I think my problem has always been, and I've always brought this up, is, when I hear sustained success, that's where I always push back, just personally, because I think sustained success is usually teams, if you're talking Super Bowl, which that should be the goal for every team, is typically dynasties, sustained success. And you're looking at Kansas City, you're looking at Bill Belichick and Tom Brady, obviously Pat Mahomes, Andy Reid. And then there's these other teams that capitalize on moments and go win Super Bowls. Like, the Eagles were able to do it twice in, less than a decade, but the Rams and teams like that. I like to compare the Lions to more so those teams, because it's hard to have a Mahomes and Andy Reid or a Tom Brady and Bill Belichick. So my biggest thing was, I understand you want to be good for a while, but there comes a time where I think fans are kind of like, this is great, winning games. Obviously they make the playoffs, but 2 years ago, you're like, winning games is fun, but you want to win the Super Bowl. And I think with that comes a level of risk or aggressiveness that maybe Brad does not agree with. And I think that's where maybe the biggest, Brad versus the fans has kind of come into play here. And I kind of tend to align more with the fans, where before we talk about sustained success or a dynasty, I just want one. Let's just get to one or win one.
Right.
And then we can start talking about having a dynasty or winning multiple, so he's consistent, but I think that's where he felt the need to maybe explain that, because that's probably when it comes to criticism. Lions over his tenure, I think, are bottom half on average in free agency spending. Typically, usually they spend a lot of money on their own players. Right. But I think it was right for him to address it, because probably people are thinking to themselves, that's probably one of the biggest question marks fans have for him, is why haven't you been spending? And he answered that.
Yeah. And again, a lot of these 1-year deals, and I think 14 out of the 15 guys they've signed, if you add Ben Bartch now, have been 1-year contracts. And a lot of the names people don't know. I think Christian Izien is going to be a good football player. I think Roger McCreary could end up being a good football player, but they're on 1-year kind of cheap deals. And Cade Mays, which you guys asked him about, he really likes him. And he kind of said he groups near the top of that free agency class. But if Cade Mays stinks and Linderbaum goes to the Raiders and is awesome, and McGovern has another good year for the Bills, that's when they'll question, if Lee McNeil has a bad year again, and really the second half of last year he was coming back from the injury, but the guys have to just perform better. And then I think the fans would leave Brad alone, because Brad has done a really good job. Has he not?
Absolutely. I mean, he mentioned it too. He said, when he was walking through every draft class, he's like, we had two first round picks when I first got here. Those guys are extended. We had 2 first round picks. Those guys are going to get extended. We had 2 second round picks that year, and those guys we want to extend. So he drafts so well. I know people look at the 2024 draft class.
Oh, really? The last 2 years has not been great.
In the last 2 years, and people question it. But when he was walking through the first couple of years, I'm like, okay, that's fair. You have to sign your own guys. But
of course,
maybe that's where people also question, where it's like, do you have to sign every one of your guys? Maybe there's some guys that deserve it, some players that you probably could move on from. Not insinuating that the players, he's done a pretty good job with, like Amon-Ra, Panay, Aiden, Brian Branch obviously has the injuries, but Kirby, I know he's hurt, but at the time you kind of thought this guy is one of the best safeties. But maybe like an Lee McNeil, did he prove to you that year that he was worth top 3 money at his position? Paying guys early is a great thing, but then it's also a massive risk. Unless it's like an Amon-Ra or Panay, where you're like, this guy's a proven top 5 all-pro player, let's pay him and take care of him, as opposed to maybe projecting a player to be good. And maybe, like you said, he doesn't necessarily hit that, then it looks a lot worse. So he's drafted well, and obviously that's always going to be tough, but you can draft, you can sign, you can trade. There's multiple ways to acquire talent. And I think Brad, to be fair, he's been consistent. It's draft and develop, and he's not too maybe fond of acquiring players that, he always says, we draft Lions players, we develop those guys. Those are our guys. But, people just want more proven talent as opposed to maybe projects in the draft. People have a lot of issues with that. And I think he'll probably get away from that, assuming the amount of heat he's gotten. But his process is his process, and he can be stubborn, but can you blame him? I mean, he's just, it's worked for him, and he's probably like, it'd be unfair for me to go against my own process if I've had success to some extent here.
No doubt. And there's been a lot of poaching for both front office folks and coaches. And they've had 4 years of winning in a row. This year sucked, but they still had a winning record, which we used to laud Jim Caldwell for 9 and 7 seasons. But fellow East Sider Jeff Iafrate on Locked On Lions today. Jeff, appreciate the time.
Thanks, Matt. Let's do it again.
You got it. Jeff Iafrate with us. Please check out Lions Collective with Jeff, Will Birchfield, Justin Rogers, Colton Pouncey. Their interview with Brad Holmes from yesterday. Just type it into YouTube. It is there. This has been a Wednesday Locked On Lions.